right at the top of the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And my name is Stephanie Kennitzer. Thanks for joining us for our monthly professional services office hours. I am coming to you from the great state of Colorado, where we are currently getting a lot of snow. So, hey, those of you might think spring is around the corner, not in Colorado, at least not today and tomorrow. It'll go away fast out here. So thanks for joining us again today. Our topic today is going to be around, whoops, sorry, got ahead of myself over here, around math, OASIS and OASIS Plus, and determining the best fit for your requirement. So a good chance for you to learn about our professional services offerings and which one you might choose in order to meet your acquisition needs and your mission, your agency mission. So just as a reminder, our professional services category office hours are an open forum for the federal acquisition workforce. It's an opportunity for you to learn from us and to ask any of your contacting questions. So by that end, please do use the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. You should all have access to that. That is where we will be taking your questions. Just chime them on in there, and as we have time, Thais will answer them either at the end of our presentation or if she wants to stop every once in a while. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll certainly capture them and get back to you individually or holistically as a group. Before we get started and I turn it over to Thais Fuller, our presenter, I just want to give you a few housekeeping notes. Our session today is being recorded. If you wish to opt out, you just may leave the meeting at any time that you wish. Our phone lines are muted to make it easier for everybody to hear Thais's great presentation. And to that end, we'll be using the Q&A box, as I just mentioned, to ask your questions. So we'll do the best to answer them all, but please do post them in there and we'll capture as many as we can. Also, Tim Balzer on our team did send out the presentation to all of our registered attendees. You should have received it via PSHC events at gsa.gov. If you're unable to locate it, let us know in the Q&A or something, and we'll get it over to you. You can also download the presentation. Tim will occasionally put it into the chat box feature on the Zoom app. This only works if you came into today's meeting using the Zoom app. So if you're using an online version, that won't work. You won't see it there. So it'll only work if you're using the Zoom app, but we'll post it in there every once in a while. We're also going to be putting the recording on our PSHC YouTube playlists and take about 3 to 4 weeks to get it edited and 508 compliant for all of our stakeholders. And we'll let you know when that's up there, or you can always go find that by looking at our playlists. You're also going to get a CLP, a continuous learning point for today's webinar. Those will be emailed to you within about a week or 10 days following the webinar. You do not need to provide us your email address or any pertinent information. Zoom has already captured that when you registered, and we'll have that information on hand already. If you don't receive your CLP within 7 to 10 business days, feel free to send an email to us at pshctraining@gsa.gov. And when we send out the presentation or any other follow-up survey information, any other follow-up information, there will be a survey, pardon me, and we would appreciate your feedback on today's session or any other topics you want to talk about. We want to make this relevant to you and what you're looking for to help you with your acquisition. So, all right, now for the housekeeping. I've taken 3 minutes and I know Thais has a full agenda for us. So let me turn it over to Thais Fuller. Thais is a professional services advisor in our Office of Professional Services and Human Capital categories. In that role, she serves as a customer advisor for anything around professional services and human capital acquisitions. Before she joined our team here in that role, she was a senior contracting officer for FAS, supporting the multiple award schedule, and a contracting officer for program support and services branch in the public building service, so the other half of GSA or other portion of GSA. So she brings a lot of contracting experience to the table and is now working in a capacity to help our customer agencies with theirs. So Thais, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll put myself on mute and turn off my camera, and I will forward those slides for you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. That was a wonderful introduction. You gave me like a lot of kudos there. I see in our participant group that there are a few folks from PBS that I used to work with, and now I just want to say hello to you guys, but I want to say hello to everyone who's decided to join us this morning. Your time is very valuable, and I appreciate your attention while we go through our slides. I know some of you probably are familiar with the MAS schedules and our OASIS and OASIS Plus offerings, or the rumors of OASIS Plus. So we'll just run through those. If you are familiar, welcome back. If you're not, welcome. I just want to give you as much advice or much information as possible so that you can help, so that I could help you determine the best fit for your requirement. Again, my name is Thais Fuller, as Stephanie has stated, and I work in professional services human capital category as a PSA. Today we'll be looking at a variety of contract solutions available from GSA for both categories that are in professional services, including MAS, our MAS schedule, and our IDIQs, OASIS and HCATs, and our new Big Mac, OASIS Plus. That's everybody's anticipating that to be awarded and so for use. So yeah, we'll talk about that. During the session, you'll learn about the ins and outs of those contracts and how they can save you time and money and lead time and administrative costs, to try to make it a little bit better for you and a little bit more streamlined, so that your acquisitions can run as smoothly as possible. Again, like you said, we're going to try to run through these slides, but we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. So if we don't get time for your questions today, you can always email your case representative if you know who that person is, or you'll be able to email them at professionalservices@gsa.gov. And so we answer those there. This is our agenda for today. We'll look at a couple fast facts about MAS offerings. We'll take a look at OASIS, HCAS, OASIS Plus, and we'll talk about some comparison of choices, mainly features of each of those vehicles and how they compare to one another. And then we'll look at a few sample scope requests that come through our scope review box. And so it gives you kind of a snapshot of what we look at and how we determine whether requests are in scope or not. And then we'll go over some tools and resources that we have available to assist you in your acquisition. Next slide, Stephanie. A few fast facts about professional services, and this is encompass all the federal services purchases over professional services and human capital. So in FY22, we had about $115 billion worth of professional services, making that the second largest category of government spend behind facilities and construction, followed by IT and products and services. So of that $70 billion, of that $115 billion, $70 billion of it was obligated through spend under management contracts, just shy of about 65% for professional services. This includes tier 1 contracts, agency-wide tier 2, small disadvantaged business tier 2, and best in class tier 3. For professional services, these multiple solutions are available depending on your specific requirement. But we're going to talk about 2 processes that we'll cover today out of these. And as you can see, we have about 4,300 contractors available on our schedules and our GWACs to cover a variety of services, and they're at competitive market rates. Next slide. Most of our, let me see, where am I? Okay. So most of our contractors, we can back up one more, Stephanie, I'm sorry. I wanted to kind of talk about, the contractors. So 4,300 contractors, that's a lot of contractors. So, but most of them, they only do a small portion of professional services. So this isn't 4,300 professional services contractors. They don't do everything. They do kind of a niche kind of work. So I don't want you to be overwhelmed by that number, because I know we talked about streamline and talked about how, we want to make sure that you are getting the best and the brightest contractors, but that 4,300 is kind of niche work. So I just wanted to make sure that I point that out there in the beginning. So we can advance the slide now. Okay, thank you. All right, so over 70 billion, like I said, of 115 billion of that spend under management of professional services was considered spending that fell into one of these 3 tiers that is not tier 0. So it was either tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. According to OMB memo M1922, we're encouraged as agencies to shift from tier 0 contracts, which are considered unmanaged or poorly managed contracts that aren't aligned with category management principles, to a different type of contract. So you can use the GSA contract, which is considered, well, with MAS, it can be considered tier 2, but you can use the GSA contract, you can use your own agency contracts, or you can use interagency contracts. But you want to make sure that you are doing the, your due diligence to make sure that you're avoiding tier 2 or tier 0 when necessary. Out of those tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 contracts, you want to make sure that they meet certain requirements from category management perspective, including data transparency and access to the entire agency. Like I said, your agency, multiple agencies, your government-wide best-in-contract solutions like your tier 3. Some of the examples that we have down here for some of the tier 1 and tier 2 contracts are Air Force NetSense. That's one of them. We have, it's specific to the Air Force, but everybody in the Air Force can use that one. It's pretty well managed. There's data captured as far as who's spending and what, and there's specific, it meets the category management definitions for managing those specific type of contracts. You could look at other contracts like the GSA mass schedule, as I mentioned earlier, which is considered a tier 2. It's well managed. There's a lot of data transparency. It's available to the entire federal government. There are certain metrics that the contractors are required to meet to participate in that program. Now, we have where tier 2 classification is extended to certain social, economic, and small business categories. Now they're considered tier 2, even if they weren't part of the schedule. For instance, 8A is one of them. This sort of small business designation encourages federal government to do more work with small businesses. So that's a plus. So if your agency needs to get tier 2 credit and they're not using the schedules program, they can use certain social economic businesses to do that. Tier 3, that's our best in class. Those are available to the entire federal government, as I mentioned earlier. They capture a lot of data as well. The data is transparent, well managed, and there's an extra level of management that's included with that. There are certain goals that are set every year. They have to be managed in a certain particular way, and they're reevaluated every year for their big status to ensure that they're still considered the best in class for the federal government. And so you have your entire spend, under management goals. So your tier 1, your tier 2, your tier 3, you have options as far as spending goes. So now that I've exhausted that slide, next slide, Stephanie. Okay, so we're going to talk about multiple award schedule now, and we're going to talk about OASIS and HCAS later on, but we're going to talk about our tier 2 offerings here. So we have several different sources of professional services solutions on the schedule program. A couple of nice things about using the schedules program is that it makes it easier and more efficient for you to acquire professional services. The first thing is that we've already negotiated pricing at the contract level. So it's already determined to be fair and reasonable, yay. So unless you're DOD, then you have to do your own fair and reasonable determination, but the ceiling prices that we've established on the schedules are considered fair and reasonable. So you don't have to do a separate determination for that when you make an award, unless you're DOD. But there are certain rules that you need to ask for discounts. So if you're, we encourage discounts, and our industry partners are aware of that. So we encourage, like I said, discounts. So ask for those discounts if you're using our schedules. So you end up getting a better rate than what's on the schedule contract. As I mentioned, government-wide contracts, anybody can use them. Federal and state can use them. Locals can for certain programs, including cooperative purchasing programs or IT products and services. But for state and local agencies, they can take advantage of any of the disaster recovery and response programs, like things that are part of the Stafford Act, declared emergency. That's a tongue twister. So if you're working with any state or local agencies that need that type of work, they can do that on the schedule. Some great time savings from agencies that typically see by using the schedules is that it's very streamlined. So you will see some cost avoidance because you're not having to do a separate FAR 15 buy into your negotiations and having to do discussions afterwards. So you can save a lot of time from using the schedules by using our schedules, you can save a lot of time. So lots of small businesses, about 4,000 plus contractors, but most of them are small business. About 80% roughly, that's kind of the standing number. You can select and filter by social and economic businesses. So you can filter by veteran-owned, service-disabled veteran-owned, woman-owned, small business, economically disadvantaged small business. So you can look at pretty much you can target anybody or any social economic business in the schedules. You just have to filter it through. Another nice thing about the schedules program is that you can compete amongst large, medium-sized, and small businesses at the same time. You don't have to go to just one type of business. You can factor it in. If you want to get small businesses to compete, you can give them an edge in the evaluation criteria by having that as a small business or small business as an evaluation factor. As far as the numbers, as far as competition goes, it's pretty reasonable. You have roughly about 2 to 3, which is what you want, as far as competition goes. So it all depends, of course, on the requirements. So depending on what you're buying, it may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but average is probably about 2 to 3. You have a lot of flexibility in how you evaluate your proposals. There are a few restrictions on how you can determine how you can evaluate them. You can be LPTA, which everybody loves. You can do best value trade-off, anything pretty much commercially you can use as far as evaluation criteria. Halt time, 80 days roughly. But that's the data the RFQ is put out up to award. So it may be a little long for some folks, but that's about, the gamut as far as like, if you have more complex work, something like that, is roughly about that time. So, it could be less, it could be more. Let's see. As far as the tools, we have tons of tools. eBuy is one that we use for schedules. So I think if you've used, MAS in the past, you're probably pretty familiar with eBuy. It's not going anywhere. As far as audits are concerned, we do a lot of internal audits and things like that. Like we have our IOAs, we have our who make sure that contractors are doing things that they're supposed to do, helping them market their services. We do a lot of that as well. And then we do a lot of customer service. We have our CSDs out there who are ready to assist you. You have folks like myself and our team who answer a lot of the questions that come through the NCSC boxes, the tier 2 box. So there's a lot of value for using the schedules program and working with us. Next slide. Use us, use us. You can see some of the types of services that we offer under MAS and human capital. And this is MAS human capital. So this is separate from the HCATS program. This is part of MAS. So I highlighted a couple of actual services here. You won't find these particular services under OASIS or HCATS, the standalones, but you can find them under the schedules. So if you need language services, if you need translation, interpretation, linguistic studies, that type of thing, we do offer it under the schedules program. We also offer identity protection services. In fact, it's actually a requirement to use the schedules program for that. If your agency ever finds themselves in a breach of PII, which I just had someone message me yesterday about a breach of PII, that particular sin is actually considered a best-in-class sin on our schedules just because of the way it's managed. So please use it. Reach out, of course, to your agency security officer if you do have a breach of PII. But if you are that person, that buyer, we do have the schedules program available for you. Actually, it's mandated. Okay, so like I said, you get logistics, support services, but you can't do personal services. So if you have, you have need of a lawyer or something like that, you have to hire an actual lawyer, but we do provide a lot of support, legal assistance, that kind of thing. Let's see, human capital, background investigations. Human capital expanded a portion of the schedules for background investigation just beyond the hiring process. So if you need to do other background investigations other than hiring processes, it's actually available on the schedule. You of course have to do an RFI and see if they can actually do it, but it's available. One thing I want to point out before we go is that schedules are based off 8.4, as you can see in the title there, versus FAR Part 16, which we'll cover that later. They're very two different types or different parts of FAR, and we don't want to get those two mixed up. So I just want to make that clear. Let's see here. I think that's it. I think I beat that one. Next slide. I can beat a slide down if you haven't already figured that out. Okay, so order level materials. So one of the drawbacks of using the schedules program in the past was that it was nearly impossible to get ODCs to provide a complete solution. So now we're able to add the order level materials, special item number or SIN, to the schedules program to allow for agencies to acquire ODCs, such as time and materials, to a scheduled purchase. So the schedule, contractor that you're contracting with, they don't necessarily have to have those items on schedule, or whether they're services and supplies or whatever, they can include them as OLMs. Some of the limitations they have to get competitive pricing for those items, of course, because there's always a limitation. The OLMs cannot exceed 33.3% of the total value of your requirement, whether it's a task order or if it's a BPA, and they have to have the OLM SIN as a part of their contract. And I'm mentioning this because even though we're talking about professional services, professional service providers, I think all of them have the OLM SIN on there, but don't quote me on that. Don't hold me to that, but I believe they all do. But there may be other categories that may still need to have, or they may need to check and see if they have the OLM SIN as part of their contract. So that's all I want to caveat there. Of course, that's nice that we have that OLM. Again, it's only a time and materials cleanse. So you may, have to write up a DNF for that. We have templates for that. Just a little plug for that. We have templates. So it's a great way to, get those ODCs on your contract. So that's a plus now for the MAS. Next slide. I updated this slide, but I don't know if you got that update before. Let's see. Okay, yeah, you did. Oh, I'm glad. Okay, so I did update this slide because I had a bunch of old SINs on here. This SIN is one that we added recently, the new subgroup, the 541611, and it's been pretty popular. So if you have not already explored it, please do, if you have need for it anyway. So we're glad to be able to have that on there. And I believe there are, is it 8? And I may have it backwards, 8 unrestricted and 2 small business, or 2 small business, or 2 unrestricted and 8 small businesses. That's what those parentheses are for. Next slide. That will move rather quickly. Okay. All right. So does anybody have any questions? I'm just going to pop here. I know I'm speaking kind of fast, but I want to make sure I'm getting through. Any questions coming through the chat? I see a chat. Okay, that's Tim.
We've answered quite a few questions, or a couple of them that have come in, and there's one that's pending. I think we're going to have to get back to that gentleman about his question.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll keep going. I'll keep moving it. Okay. So, again, so we have, to contrast the schedules program, we have other solutions that are available for professional and human capital services, and that's OASIS, which stands for One Acquisition Solution for Integrated Services, and HCATS, which is Human Capital and Training Solutions. And this is separate, like I said earlier. This HCATS is separate from MAS Human Capital. So the great thing about these programs is that they're flexible. They're not quite as flexible as the MAS program as far as like the industry base. So the industry base that, and when I say this, it's the MAS schedule is kind of open solicitation. You have your, past performance or technical, and then, it's far as as long as you can meet those criteria for the solicitation, and you're able to have a scheduled contract. And I'm not diminishing it in any way, because mass is our bread and butter. But the couple great things about these contract programs here are that their contractor and their industry base had to go through a more vigorous vetting process. So they had to demonstrate way more projects to show that they were capable and experienced with doing the type of work that they apply for these programs. So if they're an engineering firm, if they wanted to get a scheduled contract, like I said earlier, they just have to, show their technical references as far as, whether they, worked on this type of work, 2 years in that space or whatever, and they met all of the criteria. They have a suite of offerings and a price list and all the other things that are required on the mass schedule. But these contractors, they had to show a little bit more as far as the experience capabilities. They had, there's a whole gamut of things that they had to show. And we also capped some of these. So for OASIS, unrestricted, they were capped at about 40 awards at the time. And so only the highest qualified vendors got awards. So they had to have, like I said, most experience, the best resumes, years and years of doing what they did, certifications, and, the best in the industry partners, because, we want to make sure these are, best in class. So with these, they do have small business track, so you can do like a complete small business set aside on these as well. They're pretty flexible, like I mentioned earlier. They have, as far as small business participation, I believe, and don't quote me on this, we'll have to check on this one too. I should have known this one, but I didn't. I can't know everything. You can further set them aside for hub zone, women owned, and all that. But as far as the programs, I know you can do SBA designated small business types. These contracts, again, we manage these on the back end as far as, making sure that they are managed well as far as tier 3 is concerned. So you get the best in class credit, you get the competition levels, very reasonable for the agencies. You're not having to evaluate too many proposals because, like I said, it's been capped. So you don't have a overrun of proposals. So you might get maybe like 2 to 4 responses back roughly. I don't know. A lot of people who've been using them, they may, find that they don't get that many, but there's other factors that go into why they don't get that many. But roughly about 2 to 4. But we also provide extra support as far as training goes. So there's DPA training for OASIS and HCAS, which you have to go to DPA training, delegation or procurement authority training in order to use any of these contracts. So as far as you have to definitely be a CO. So we have, a really good and very responsive program management office. We also are very heavily involved in industry engagement. So the contractors themselves also have to be very, very involved in program management reviews. So they're actually required to do program management reviews once a year. So we hold I think we hold like 2 of them a year, but they're required to go and hear about what's going on with the programs, how they're changing, what types of things are going on. For instance, like, if anything's impacting as far as mass modifications and stuff, they have to make sure that they are up to date and aware of those and very responsive. So, so those contracts are very well managed. So you're in good hands. We also have dedicated industry liaisons, if I haven't already mentioned that, that communicate with our industry and let us know how things are going from their end. So we are very, very plugged into these contracts. Okay, Stephanie, I'm ready for you. Next slide. Okay, so PALT. So you can see the PALT times here have a little bit of variety depending on the value of your contract and the program that you're using. So if you're under, 10 million, there's no protest under OASIS and HCAS, so it usually goes pretty quickly. As you can see, if you're using an unrestricted family of contracts, and if it's under 10 million, I believe that your times are like 75 days. Yep, 75 days. I can see it here. So if you go to the bottom right corner of here, that's like assisted acquisition. and it's over 50 million because they won't touch you unless you're like high dollar. You're looking at about 150 days, 149, 150 days, over 50 million. So the competition may not necessarily be, as robust. You may not have as many responses, but your criteria may be more complex when you get at that higher dollar amount. So you might need to take more time, and you may have a lot more people, a lot more, back and forth. So you want to make sure you plan for that. The nice thing about these programs are that you can do direct sole source 8A, so that speeds up a lot. So if you can see that the numbers in 8A program are a little bit lower in cases than they are for the other contract families, because you can do sole source direct awards. So you can see competition numbers below, and in the bottom table, under restricted, around 2.6 proposals, 3 for small business, and 2.88 for 8A. So the numbers there are a little bit skewed because you can do sole source direct awards, like I mentioned earlier. So that's your competition. So yeah, so we're cooking pretty much in there. Next slide. Okay, these are some HCAT statistics, and I'll just go ahead and be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot about HCAT. And I know they get a lot of flack, but these are some statistics for them. So they have roughly about 120 agency customers, about roughly 1,000 DPA certified COs. So people use them, and they're there, and they're cooking. They have about 2.2 million average task order values, and about 3.2 billion total estimated task orders. So they're over there. They're making a lot of money. But like I said, I don't know a whole lot about them. And these are their stats when it comes to number of contracts that are awarded from unrestricted. You see about 84. average bid time is about 2.4 days. And then their PAW is about, I said 2.4 days, 2.4 bids. And average PAW is about 60 days. So they're competitive. Okay, next slide. Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we offer as far as IDIQs for our Part 16, they're very competitive, comparable to what I showed you with the schedules program, but they're a little bit more fine-tuned, a little bit more narrow in scope. So you can see some of the different services under OASIS. You have program management services, excuse me, management consulting, logistics engineering, scientific and R&D, and HCAT is more focused on training and development. So you have, your entire focus for HCAT is human capital, strategy, organizational performance, and stuff like that. There is some overlap, but because HCAT was started a little bit a couple years after OASIS, but it's like, as far as overlap, OASIS doesn't include like the NAICS code, like 54162, 541612, and Pool 1. But if you need a NAICS code for your requirement, we recommend HCAS, because that program is developed around human capital consulting, whereas OASIS is more engineering. So there's some overlap, but if you really need a pure like training or HCATs or something like that, go right directly to that vehicle, because they'll most likely be able to. You'll most likely get a little bit more of a vendor pool that can meet your requirement than if you go to somewhere like OASIS, where they may have one or two who are like, I may be able to help you, but I don't know. Anyhow, let's see here. A couple things that I did want to note here is that you don't see language services, you don't see legal services, you don't see any of those background investigations on these projects or on these vehicles, because the MAS program just has a better vendor pool, and then they're just readily available there on. And again, like I said, with identity protection services, even though it's on MAS, it's considered best in class tier 2 or tier 3. So you're still getting that credit. But anyhow, that's where you'll see some of the key differences on IDIQs versus MAS. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how to use OASIS and HCATs. And I'm roughly about halfway on time. Okay, let me speed it up here. So if you follow, 8.4 with MAS, you kind of know how that goes. But as far as OASIS and HCAS, you have to have a DPA, and we have a, request for DPA. We have a whole page that'll walk you through that. We also have training that is offered, I believe, once a month, but then you can do on demand on DAU. I think it's FAC 153. The only reason I remember that is kind of rhymes. So you can do DPA training for that. We recommend that, you follow with the DPA. I believe that you get an ordering guide in there, and it's also listed on their webpage. But you want to follow, the contract terms and conditions for OASIS and HCAS. So make sure you're familiar with that, familiar with the ordering guides. Those are huge. We get a lot of questions through the NCSC box, and we enjoy answering them because that makes us feel like, we're useful. But a lot of those questions that are asked can be found in the ordering guide. So, and the ordering guides are really great. They have links to things and, all these embedded goodies in those. So please, if you haven't already, download the ordering guide, take a look at that. But again, you want to plan around expectations because, things happen as far as, PALT numbers and things like that. If you're about, it may take a little bit more time, especially if something's over 10 million, to take a longer time to evaluate proposals. So we recommend, of course, if you have a requirement that's over 10 million or, something that you really aren't sure as far as the scope is concerned, we offer scope reviews. We enjoy scope reviews. It's part of our job. But we offer scope reviews. So please, by all means, send your scope reviews and we'll look at your scope reviews. We'll help you determine what's the best NAICS and the best vehicles. If it's not something that we offer, we'll also recommend if you go open market. Very, very rarely do we get any of these, or personally, I haven't, but we'll recommend open market if we can't find a vehicle for you in GSA. And when I say professional services, yes, we want to make sure you are considering professional services, but in the event that it's not a professional services SIN or requirement, we also, we'll email our counterparts and say, hey, take a look at this. Would that fit under one of your vehicles or, what have you? So we are well connected on this end, and we'll try as hard as we can before we send you out on open market. So you're in good hands. Again, no scope, in scope protests under 10 million. You do issue when you're issuing a requirement to one of these programs. You want to make sure that you issue it to one pool or subpool. So if it's 8A pool, you issue it on 8A pool. If it's one particular pool under OASIS, like if it's pool 1 or pool 2, you're only issuing it to one pool. So if you have to determine, am I going to do, and I think I'm mixing up, I may be confusing it a little bit, but when I say one pool, I mean one pool under that or one subpool. So if you're determined, am I going to do this under unrestricted or if I'm going to do this under small business set aside or 8A, you have to decide that. But when you figure out what pool, then as far as the scope goes, you make sure that you determine that pool for that buy. But we'll help you with that too, as far as RFI is concerned. You can also do some market research for RFIs. And we can help you with that. Ancillary labor is allowed, and I probably confused some people on that, and I apologize with that pool. So again, the ancillary services or ancillary labor is allowed. And the nice thing about it is that your entire requirement can consist completely of ancillary labor. Ancillary labor can be out of what it can be considered out of scope. I know I'm mixing this up. Ancillary labor can be out of what's considered out of scope. Does that make sense? It can be considered in scope, but it's like an expert for that. Oh goodness, I'm messing this one up. It's a professional labor category that's not necessarily in scope of the ones that we have considered standardized. But you can use any amount of ancillary labor. Let me start over because I'm messing this up and I don't want to confuse y'all. We'll come back. I'll come back to that. we'll skip past that. Anyway, we'll talk about unpriced because I know I'm confusing you because I'm confusing myself and I don't want to confuse anybody. So I'm gonna get back to that, and I'll probably have that sent out as a QA as well because I'm confusing that. So usually like these contracts are unpriced. They have a ceiling price, but they are only for time and materials, labor hour contracts that are not subject to fair opportunity. And we'll move on. Thank you, ma'am. Oh, as far as reporting, send us an email. A simple email will suffice for reporting goes. And like I said, I apologize. I don't want to fluster myself with and I'm going to explain that a little bit better. I just know I'm not explaining it the way it should be explained. Bunch of IDIQ program updates. So everybody knows about OASIS now, or OASIS Plus. So OASIS is expiring. The contract programs are expiring 1 March 2025 for unrestricted and 19 December 2024 for small business and 8A. We've migrated to Symphony, which we will be using exclusively for OASIS Plus. So if you aren't already using Symphony, I would encourage it. HCATs, we've combined the DPA training with OASIS, like I said, FAC 153. So if you need, and it's on demand on DAU. So if you need DPA training outside of what's offered monthly, you can always go to DAU and go to FAC 153 and you can get your DPA training and you can press on. Okay. So OASIS Plus, everybody's waiting and anticipating for OASIS Plus. So OASIS Plus is our new services Big Mac, not Big Mac, but Big Mac. And it's going to replace OASIS Plus. It is our, it provides, best-in-class contracts. So again, it's a replacement for OASIS Plus. We're anticipating awards coming soon. Everybody's chomping at the bit for it. But we, in creating these, we use a phased approach. Of course, we've covering the scope of what's included under, or what's included and acquirable under OASIS, the OASIS program. We're also including the scope of BMO and human capital, which that sunsets kind of a little bit later, but we're including those as well. And then we're going to also include a bunch of other previously unidentified services. So that's to be continued. Let's see. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit more about OASIS program. It'll be consisting of 6 separate and distinct IDIQ contracts. They're listed here. There's going to be, of course, unrestricted, why not, which allows for any business type or size to participate as long as they qualify. So it will consist of, mostly large businesses. And then that, what that entails as far as large business is concerned. We have a total small business set aside, as you can see, but we also have, which we didn't have before in OASIS, is that we have certain IDIQs that are set aside for specific socioeconomic types. So 8A has their own, Hub Zone has their own, Service Disabled Vet. Small business has their own, which is nice, right? I'm a vet too, so that's nice. Certified women-owned small business has their own. So they all have the same domains with one exception. So the domains are the titles that we're using for functional grouping of services that are very similar and make sense to have in the same area. So in OASIS, we have pools. OASIS Plus, we're going to have domains. So, and this is to make sure that the industry partners that provide very similar services are competing against their own competitors. So if they're offering the same or similar services, then they can all compete against instead of being restricted by certain pools. So again, with OASIS Plus, they'll still have that, preponderance of an NAICS, but if you have other NAICS codes, which a lot of contractors do, then that's where the domains can be helpful with having being able to compete with those other other NAICS codes against your other true competitors. So they may overlap a little bit. Next slide. Okay, so again, I talked about the 6 contract families, domains versus pool structure. We're requiring use of the Symphony as our electronic contract and task order management system. So in OASIS, they were allowed to, and I'm running on time here. OASIS, they were allowed to do email at first, but then they phased that out, and eBuy and Symphony. So now it's only going to be OASIS, or only going to be Symphony. So sharpen your pencils on Symphony, because that's, if you're going to use OASIS Plus, you're going to have to use Symphony. And we're going to offer training for that as well. Contract qualifications, domains, we talked about that a little bit. The CAF fee is a flat 0.15% across the board. Open solicitations after initial phase of awards, OASIS Plus, they had, they didn't have continuous on-ramping in, but now they're going to have continuous on-ramping. So if a contractor isn't able, and it's kind of like mass, where you can, as long as you're qualified and you're ready, you can on-ramp. And so that's nice. That's a nice key difference. Next slide. I'm gonna have to zoom through the rest of these. Okay, unique features, flexible, expandable domain structure. Industrial base, I talked about the highly qualified contractors on OASIS, same thing on OASIS Plus. Global access to commercial and non-commercial services, which is so good for, those buys that you have non-commercial, which we've seen in quite a few come through your 10-year order and base period. No contract caps or ceilings. So a lot of things here are really good, unique features. We're having that market research tools, the things that we have now, like as far as scope reviews and Symphony and things like that, or scope review tools, Symphony and those things on by gsa.gov. So go out there and look at that. But they'll be, those tools will be available for you. Price evaluation at the contract level, which I think is a little bit different than OASIS Plus, because OASIS, they're all on price, but that was kind of one of the rubs, was that we didn't have pricing available for the CEOs to look at unless you were a fair opportunity time and material sole source. So now they'll be available for CEOs to look at and determine fair and reasonable, but it's still going to be limited. So they'll be available for you. So, okay, next slide. All right, so this again is our proposed phase 1 domains. Intelligence is in there, management advisory facilities, R&D, all those are going to be in phase 1. And then enterprise solutions is one of the ones that are considered an expanded scope that wasn't on any of the other ones, like on OASIS. And then we have our phase 2 domain as well. And then you see where things are kind of overlapping as far as BMO, and where HCATS is, we're kind of phasing that in because they still have time on their contract right now, so they're not sunsetting yet. Okay, next slide. All right, so determine if it best fit for schedules, OASIS, and HCATS. So it's all about scope, commerciality, commercial versus non-commercial. With mass, you can only do commercial buys on mass. Non-commercial, you can do non-commercial on HCATS and OASIS. Define requirements. I mean, if you know what your requirement is, it's better to determine which vehicle will work for you. And your NAICS codes. Your NAICS codes will definitely determine where your pools are as far as RFQs are concerned. Contract type and vehicles required. Task orders, BPAs can be done on mass as well as task orders, but you can't do a BPA off of an IDIQ. So OASIS and HCATS, you can't do BPAs off of those. Option years are available for all vehicles and option periods. And then you have your optional cleanse as well. Now, as far as the contract type, firm fixed price, T&M, labor hours on mass, all of those, including costs and hybrids, are on HCAT and OASIS. So you use those parameters to help you determine best fit. Next slide. Okay, comparison of choices. Next slide. Okay, so this is a quick comparison, and you can look at this at your leisure, since we're kind of short on time. But these will give you kind of those quick comparisons between, like I said, HCATS and OASIS. You got your mass and you have your OASIS Plus, which is similar to HCATS and OASIS, but there are, a couple of different, features that are a little bit different, like as far as on-ramping. If you look at OASIS and HCATS and OASIS Plus, there's continuous on-ramping for OASIS Plus. Your evaluation methodology is a little bit different. So I'll leave that to you to be able to peruse at your leisure. Next slide. Okay, same thing. NAICS codes. There's the preponderance of NAICS, which is, applicable to all of those contracts, but then they also have a little bit more drill down as far as like the pools when it comes to, or domains when it comes to OASIS Plus, but then also pools. So you have those, a lot of times we have questions that come through where vendors will, or not vendors, but customers will ask about, whether or not a contractor can provide, a certain NAICS code in a certain pool. And it's like, if that contractor is in that pool, they can provide all the NAICS codes that are in that pool. So little questions like that that we get in our NCSC box, but this will give you a little bit more information regarding the pools. And then if you have additional information or additional questions, you can feel free to email us and we'll help you with that. CAF, that's kind of been, that's kind of been a thing. But right now, as you can see, we got 0.15 flat rate for all federal agencies with OASIS Plus, so that's good. There's no direct CAF. So CAF and IFF they operate kind of similar, but they're not the same. So I had questions about that too as well that come through the NCSC box. Next slide. Period of performance. Again, this chart, I'm not going to go through all the chart because, like I said, we only got a few minutes left, and I want to have questions and go through some sets. So we'll cycle past that as well. Next slide. Again, next slide. I didn't realize we had that many comparison. Okay, scope reviews. Plug for scope reviews. So GSA offers order level pre-solicitation scope reviews. We strongly recommend, but they're not required. Of course, they're a nice feature, and they help ensure your requirements are placed on the appropriate vehicle. Sometimes, people want to try a little different, something different. And it's like, no, go back to what you know, because Mass has this, or OASIS can, do this, or maybe not so much. So, we help out. We help out with that. Or it could be totally in left field, like you go over there. So, we'll help you with that. As far as instructions, I think this has something to do with OASIS Plus. So OASIS Plus, of course, we're going to send out some trainings, DPA trainings, Symphony trainings, and things like that, and order and guide. So I think that's what that came in. That got lost in there. So order and guides and all that's going to be available for OASIS Plus. There's a link to the current scope review request form, but it's also on our website as well. So that's our plug for scope reviews. We like scope reviews. Okay, so I pulled a couple of examples and of scope reviews requests that have come through our box, and this is pretty much just a snapshot, kind of like a header snapshot of what we see. Of course, I didn't put the scope in here because we don't have time for that, and they can get a little bit extensive. So this one in particular is a new requirement. So we deal with new requirements, but also expiring or previous acquired requirements that maybe need to be checked to see if they're still within scope of the NAICS code. So we do all of that. So new requirement, single task order, and this requirements for security badges, maintaining, accountability for conducting security functions and things like that. So the requested NAICS code was 541611 or OASIS Pool 1. And I put both, and this is how it's sometimes come in. So 54611 is kind of applicable across all of them. But as far as OASIS Pool 1, it falls in OASIS Pool 1 as well. This one had options. It was a firm fixed price, and the total estimated value was 2.5 million. I looked at the scope, and we determined that 541 or what is it? 5561110. I think I'm missing a digit there, or 561612 would be more applicable to this. And I put or OASIS Plus under business admin. When OASIS Plus is awarded and notice to proceed are out and everybody's awarded, it can also go under that business admin. So I wanted to plug that in there. Even though OASIS Plus is an awarded, I wanted to make sure that you can kind of see where things can kind of flow if you have a similar requirement. Next slide. Okay, this was a financial support. So this was a previous buy. You can see the DODAC or the PID number there. Single award task order awarded to a particular vendor and issued under OASIS Small Business. So a lot of times, like I said, folks would just want to do a quick check and see if it's still applicable. So this is a small business set aside. So when it always a small business. And it was, I believe it was 541.715 exception C, pool 5, always is pool 5B. There were options. It was a hybrid. So I would not consider this for a mass contract because we don't have hybrids on mass contract. Estimated 52 million. We determined it was 5.1611. OASIS pool 1 would have been a better pool for this requirement. Now, there's some caveats here because, you know, vendors can also have more than one, be under more than one pool. If they found that, you know, they ran into, you know, something at, you know, OASIS 5 pool 5B that, you know, triggered them to reevaluate. I don't know what the details are about it, but we determined it would be better under OASIS pool, and it's financial support. So, you know, they could have had one of those where they had a little, you know, a little offshoot of something bigger, a bigger program that they needed financial support, but now they want to expand it a little bit. So there's different reasons why they may have moved a different pool or decided to reevaluate. Next slide. Okay, this was for HCAT, training consulting. I mean, if you look at training, we always take a look at it and really, you know, want to determine whether or not it doesn't have IT in it and other things that are kind of integrated in it. But this one was kind of, you know, a shoe-in for HCATs. I mean, they asked for 541990 OASIS pool 1, but like I said earlier, sometimes things will kind of overlap, but it's like in certain instances, it's just better to go to a pure like HCAS or something like that, where they specialize in that particular work. So that's what was determined here. And next slide. And I think this one was OASIS. So yeah, so this one, civil engineering and labor services. Now I put this one in here for a reason. So sometimes we get scopes that have AE and construction kind of little, you know, fuzzy, where it may not be purely like Davis-Bacon, but it could skirt along the edges a little bit. And so it's like these, and that's why I put this one here. So this one, they wanted 541330 pool 1. But they had a little bit of AE kind of civil engineering stuff, but we said, hey, you know, 541330 was fine for this one because a lot of it was program management and stuff like that. But there are some exceptions, and we want to make sure you're aware of that. So we make sure, hey, there's no AE, there's no Davis-Bacon Act, there's no anything that requires, you know, heavy certifications and stuff, because we don't want to fall into the FAR 36 realm, because that's not our realm. So, you know, we get things like that, and we have to make those determinations. I'm at the top of the hour. I think, let's see, what's the next one? Next slide. These are kind of some of our market. So our market research tools, these are D2D data analytics. They are open. You may need to have max.gov, but I think these are all public. Go there and look at the data and dashboard analytics for your agencies or for our categories, and you can see how our numbers are running there. Next slide. Market research tools. So these are some of our market research tools that are available. A lot of these are D2D dashboards. I think all of them are D2D dashboards. Again, I was talking about earlier. You can look at award exploration, contract inventory, small business, sales query. You can look at our numbers and see how we're doing as far as our vehicles are concerned. And what's the next one? Next slide. Okay. We got 2 minutes, y'all. I apologize. There was a lot of information, and we could really get into weeds. If you have any questions that I can answer right now, let me look in the Q&A and see if there are any questions.
Thais, it's Stephanie. So Rachel and I and Tim have been plowing through a bunch of questions. There are a couple of questions that we might need a little bit more clarity on, and we've asked folks to email professionalservices@gsa.gov, and we'd be glad to answer those. So, and Rachel, it looks like Rachel is typing an additional one. So in the interest of time, I think the best thing to do would be to wrap it up and go ahead and encourage folks to send an email to professionalservices@gsa.gov for any additional questions. We will also download these questions, and if there's any of them, or those that we can get back to you, we'll get back to you directly on those.
Okay.
Hope that's okay with everybody.
I hope so too. I try to get as much information as possible.
So much great information to share. No worries, Thais. There's a lot of information to share. I think I hope you walk away today from the presentation to just have a little bit of insight about the range of professional services and human capital services solutions that we have available to the federal government. There are lots of different types. They have different offerings, different ordering procedures, different ways that you can use them in order to meet your mission requirement. If you're not sure which one is a good fit for you, what's the right fit, use the resources and tools we have available to you. Reach out to our customer account managers and our professional services advisors, email professionalservices@gsa.gov, use our scope review tool, and we'll get back to you on those. We want to help you be able to support your mission. So Thais, thank you so much for your time today, for preparing and then showing up and answering our questions. We really do appreciate you. And then lastly, I just want to remind folks that you will, Tim Balzer did send out an email just prior to the event with today's slide deck. If you didn't get that, feel free to please email PSHC events PSHC@gsa.gov, and we'll get that back over to you. And your CLPs will be coming to you via an email along with a survey. We do appreciate your time in advance for taking that survey and giving us the feedback on additional sessions, future sessions. Would you like us to do this session again? Maybe just dig into one or two parts of it rather than a big overview, whatever it is that we can do to help you make your jobs easier. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.